Thank you very much for that introduction. Let's see if we can get this rolling as well. Good. So I had the privilege of selecting my own title for this, and it became 3 words that I wanted to think and discuss and talk a little bit with you about. Design, because that's the main aim of the conference, and action, and whatever that may be and mean in this context, and then impact. And the few words I could pick up from your introduction, I used to study German way long time ago, so I just picked up a few things about it, but I can see that finding out where the funding should come from for this type of research, and how to publish and how to make this a scientific field is something that we share between Sweden and Germany as an important topic to focus on. So this is what I wanted to talk about. I have a really strange mixture of different backgrounds. I happen to slip into different jobs that I'm doing. Right now I have actually 6 different things that I'm doing, and you mentioned in your introduction most of them. But I wanted to ground and base what I'm doing in sort of my background. I recently came back to my old university, which isn't Stockholm, but Uppsala, which is actually closer to the Stockholm airport than Stockholm is. But it's Northern Europe's oldest university, and has every subject you can think about but design. There's no design there for some reason that I don't really know about. And within that context, I got to do everything from studying. I studied engineering physics, I studied psychology, I studied organizational learning, and a little bit of design as well, the things I could find at that time. And given who my supervisor was, we went into trying to influence things in practice. So I like practice a lot. And practice, and you like actually influencing and having an impact on what you're doing. And I wanted to connect design and design research with impact, not only meaning scientific impact, but societal impact. So I'm going to touch upon a few of these different cases that I've been involved with in all sorts of different domains. But as you said, right now I have moved to KTH in Stockholm, Royal Institute of Technology, where I'm a dean of the School of Computer Science and Communication. A lot more design is happening there. And these are just snapshots from different things that are happening in our activities there, all the way from, we have probably Europe's biggest robotics group that my co-dean Danica Kragic is working on. Maybe a few of you have met my colleague Kristina Höök, Kia Höök, who's running the Mobile Life Center, of which we're a part as well, working on emotional interfaces, and she's a professor in interaction design. So that's the connection to that. But working with everything from neuroinformatics, the new EU flagship project, the Human Brain Project, we're the Swedish partner in that project, all the way to sort of quite advanced visualizations. We have a really large screen display, actually similar to what's here in Constance that I saw the last time I was here. And all the way up to our robot up there, Furhat, who actually was purchased by Disney just a few weeks ago. So that we're kind of proud of. But being a researcher working and trying to influence things, I can't help myself. I need to say what I think at all possible instances about things. And a few years ago, when I was invited to a discussion with our IT minister, I said what I thought on things. And then she got back and said, would you want to run our committee for digitization with the government? Meaning that you're supposed to give advice on which type of political decisions we should make within IT. And I said, IT, but that's more or less everything in the society. Yes, she said. And then I said, but you know what? I'm not Swedish. Is that a problem? And then they said, oh my God, we need to think about that, because I'm actually Norwegian. But then in the end, they came back and said, oh, that's fine. And by the way, being a Norwegian in Sweden, I can't vote. No, that's no problem. I may not agree with you politically, Mr. or Mrs. Minister, on these matters. No problem. So do you allow me to disagree with you also? Yeah, for sure. In public? Yeah, but please let me know a little bit in advance when you want to disagree with me. So I got the role to head this digital committee in Sweden. And right now, maybe you don't know this, we had an election just less than a month ago and a change of government. So she's no longer the IT minister. We have a new IT minister. And that was actually quite confusing, because when they advertised the new government, there wasn't an IT minister. They made a mistake. They didn't appoint an IT minister. 2 hours later, there were two that claimed to be IT ministers from different parties. But then in the end, we actually got an IT minister who's now Minister of Building, Architecture and IT. Strange mixture, because Anna Karin, the former minister, she was Minister of Energy and IT. So IT is something where you never get an own minister for it. It's something that is stuck on to other ministers, which is a bit strange in a way. Once I got appointed for this, and my job is coming to an end by the end of 2015. In Europe, they decided to, based on good traditions from UK, where they had a digital champion, Martha Lane Fox, who was the digital champion of UK. Manuel Barroso thought that digital champion, this is a good way. This is something that works for free to get everybody in the country online. Every European country should have one of those. And so therefore, they sent a letter to all prime ministers of the European countries saying, you should appoint a digital champion as well. And given that they had recently appointed me for this other thing, they said, you can take that as well. And I came to my boss and I said, I've been appointed digital champion. And my boss, the rector of the university, said, my dog has become a champion. That was how much that was worth in that sense. So here was Nelly Cruz, who actually also are no longer in the European Commission. And now it's a German who I haven't met yet, who's the commissioner in charge of IT in the European Union. It's going to be fascinating to meet him and learn more about this. When they appointed digital champions, they appointed digital champions in every country in Europe, but one. There was one country that was the last one to appoint a digital champion. You know which country that was? Germany. And unfortunately, Gesche, when she finally was appointed, she couldn't come and be here today. And I really hate that, because she's a wonderful person. And I'm happy that they finally decided to appoint somebody in Germany as well. Where they started in UK with Martha Lane Fox, they've actually said that you're no longer our digital champion. And we're not proposing a new digital champion to replace you. And my suspicion is that UK do not know for sure what they're thinking about in relations to the European Union at all. So therefore, they don't want to appoint somebody new as that. So I'm supposed to make sure, without any pay, that everybody in my country comes online and improves digital skills. That's a good task. Last year, I got another interesting task, probably based on a bit of these things, and that was actually being a guest professor at INSEAD, which is one of the more prestigious business schools. And this is really fascinating, I would see, because our field, the human-computer interaction, which is my professorship, and the design community as such that I speak quite a lot to and on behalf of, the business leaders of the world should know much more about that. I believe that we can have a much larger impact by influencing these people that follow the advanced management programs at such a business school on these things. So I'm really happy to have the possibility of doing that. I haven't fully decided what to speak about today, but I have a few different slides that I'm jumping back and forth between, and we'll see where we end up in the end. But I'm thinking about design and its relationship to research. How many in the room are not designers? A few of you are not. How many of you are interaction designers in the room? A few that are, okay? Because I want to sort of find out from where you're coming. In Sweden, the design field has a long tradition, probably also because of the fact that our kings have always been very interested in design. Sigvard Bernadotte is a very famous designer in Sweden who's made a lot of different crafts products for the home environment and actually made design become an important subject. And right now, the youngest prince in Sweden is also a well-known designer, so it's always been quite high up on the agenda and people have paid attention to it. But design research hasn't been very much around. You thought about it as a craft and therefore not too much of collaboration with research or actually distinguishing between it. But I don't know if you saw the first logotype that was on my university here. And this is in Swedish, so you can't make sense out of it probably. KTH. This is the logo saying science and art. So that's the brand of my very technical university. Science and art is the things that they want to focus on. And art, what do they mean by art? Because we don't have that much art. So it's more like the art of engineering they're thinking about. They're thinking about it as engineering design rather than what we would call proper design in a sense. And therefore, there's no really tradition of making research into design. But we have a number of different artistic schools in Sweden. We have close to us, we have the School of Opera, we have the School of Dance and Circus, we have the Royal Musical Academy, we have the Dramatical Institute for the Performing Arts and so forth. So there's a lot of different arts-related subjects close by. And the Stockholm School for Arts is now in a close collaboration with my university because they want to start their PhD education around the arts and get that up and running. So whenever I teach PhD students, I from all different topics, I ask this question: why do you want to do research? What are you actually aiming for your research? Because most people that do research, they have in their PhD thesis, they have like 3 questions up front that they want to answer. And that's sort of the response to such a question. So I want to ask them, well, why do you really want to do research? Do you have any driving forces behind you that are sort of pushing you towards doing these kind of things? And people start thinking about this. And I did this at a PhD defense in Finland for a guy. And I don't know if you've ever seen a PhD defense in Finland, but that's the most traditional you can think of. I've heard that it's only in Holland they have a similarly sort of traditional way of doing a PhD. So you dress up in tails and you have a big hat that you walk in with and you nod to everybody and you speak in a certain order and things like that. And I started by asking the PhD student, what's really your research objective? And he then thought, this is a trick question. So he was thinking for a bit too long, so I said to them, okay, I'll give you 3 options. Your first option is, you want to change the world. The second option is you want to contribute new knowledge to the world. And the third option is you want a PhD. And he was sweating quite a lot. And he just said in his Finnish English, could I come up with a fourth option? And I said, yes, please do. But I'll show to you that your fourth option is actually one of these three. So he didn't do that. So he said, I want to change the world. And I said, what have you done? In the light of the fact that you want to change the world. And then he started talking about, he had built a knowledge repository for storing design decisions, clustering them together, and making groups of things and so forth. And after he had talked about it, I said, in what way did this change the world? And then he said, I think I want to contribute new knowledge to the world. And then I said, in the light of that, what have you done? And he started talking quite a bit. And it turned out that there was a few flaws in his methodology. So in the end, he said, I think I want my PhD. And the interesting thing is that whenever I meet PhD students in a large group and ask this type of question, I ask them to raise their hands. How many in the room would want to change the world? How many would want to contribute new knowledge to the world? And how many do want a PhD? And the expectation would probably be that the majority would want to change the world, but no. It's about a third who says they want to change the world. About a third says they want to contribute new knowledge to the world, and about a third only wants their PhD so that they can go out and get a good job afterwards. So when you think about that, why do you do what you do, and how do you select your questions that you're working on? So I try to convince everybody that want to do research that the purpose of doing research is actually to try and figure out ways of sort of understanding the world as you change it and as you go along. And the question is research is it's like a tool, like what you use when you do design, but it's a different tool in a sense. So I want people to have enough self-confidence to be able to talk about and work with research in that fashion. But I see, and I become scared when I see that. When I read through journals or go to a conference, I see that most people have selected research questions that are not the ones that change the world, but the ones that are the easiest ones to get published. And that's kind of scary, I would think. Usually people and the opponents complain about my PhD students, saying that you're working with too difficult problems. You should sort of limit it to something that is studyable in a PhD thesis. And then I think it becomes too simple and too boring, and it doesn't really have any impact. So what's impact? Impact is the single most important topic right now in research in Sweden. Everybody's talking about impact. All of a sudden, everybody should focus on impact. When you ask them what is impact, they usually don't have a response to that, but when you start discussing it, you would see that they come in two groups. They come in the people that think about scientific impact, saying we need to focus on quality. We need to have highly rated A journals or highly rated conferences that we should publish our work in. We need to focus on ranking. KTH actually has 3 people full-time employed working on the ranking of our own university. I'm not kidding. They're working on that simply to figure out how does the ranking system work in order for you to be able to tailor the work that you do in such a way that you will increase your ranking. Because if you increase your ranking, you get more funding and you earn much more than the salaries that these 3 people cost. So it's actually natural to do that. Reputation is an important thing. Just simply walking around and speaking about your university in different fashions relates to that. And then funding. Funding actually comes with scientific impact to a large extent. And that may be one of the reasons that the design field doesn't have that easy to find its funding, because it hasn't yet arrived at the position where it sort of has a genuine body of knowledge and a true panacea based on which you can build all things you're doing. But now they're starting to talk about societal impact. How do you do research that has the most influence on the society? How do you select problems that are meaningful, that contribute to sort of the overall goals of our society? And that's really interesting and really important. And when meeting with designers, I always also try to figure out, why do you design? What do you design? Is it a way of expressing yourself? Or is it some sort of problem-solving activity? Or is it designing for somebody to be able to do something that they couldn't do beforehand? Based on this, I've actually slid into a lot of different fields over the years. And I've found, and this is actually an after construction, but I've found that 3 fields have been of great interest to me in my research. I've been focusing on work environment problems. I've been out in all sorts of different, typically public authorities, looking at people working. And from a design perspective, there's one thing in common about all workplaces at public authorities, and that's that there has never been a designer there. Everything has sort of been built, engineered. I actually gathered from the Swedish National Tax Board all people who had designed the graphical user interfaces of the computer system, and I asked, who designed this? Everybody was looking down. And then I pointed at a specific thing, a specific button. Who designed this button? And then somebody said, well, it's Björn, the guy who's sitting over there. That did. And Björn said, did I do that? Yeah, you're always talking about the fact that you like to draw things in school and so forth. I didn't design upon that. So it turned out that all of the design was actually generated through the tool. Nobody made any design decisions whatsoever on the most popular user interface of the entire public authorities in Sweden, which is kind of fascinating when you think about it. So that's been a focus of me, and how to focus on workplaces to avoid it from people getting a lot of stress, work environment problems, and creating more creative work environments in different sense. Then I moved into accessibility, which is currently a great topic for me, and design for all sorts of people that have special challenges when they interact with the system. And then working into social responsibility related things. I've done quite a bit of work in India and China and trying to sort of push this field there. So these are pictures showing impact in such a community at a public authority. There's 20 years between these 2 pictures from an office. You can tell which one is the older by the yellow color. But there's actually only 2 big changes, if you spot them. It's the thickness of the display. The display had become flat. And then it's the color of the post-it notes that have increased. The computer system more or less looks the same, actually, as a matter of fact, is more or less the same in these organizations. So the work tasks hasn't changed much. The ways of working, the organizational structure around it, the design of all of this hasn't changed much. And that's a bit worrying when you're thinking about impact. But I try to sort of point to this and say that we need to sort of change our focus and get design into businesses such as this. From usability, which is one point in this, I've then moved over to accessibility. This is Frederick, one of our former PhD students, sitting in front of his computer. A long time ago now, almost 20 years ago as well. The interesting thing is that his computer display is sitting at a very strange place. It's over on the side and it's switched off. And that's simply because Frederick is blind. So he's only using the display if somebody enters his room and he wants to show something to them, then he puts that on. Otherwise, there's no point in having it on. So to him, the display is what he has here and what he interacts with. He got an opportunity to do a PhD in computer science. 20 years before, that was completely impossible to do. He would have been more or less out of work. But nowadays, with all of the challenges that such groups have, you can more or less do anything in the society. And that, I think, is impact. That's a way to sort of influencing and changing how things are doing. But how do people feel about accessibility in general? And I usually show this photograph as an illustration of the way people perceive accessibility. This is Shanghai's airport. It's the restrooms or toilets, as we say when we're from this part of the world. And you have the ones aiming for the general public. Big portal, open. You can go in and do all the things you do therein. But if you are in a wheelchair, you're bound to go to the right one. How do you do that? Well, you go over there, and just below the handicapped sign, there's a button that you can press. The point is that the button is so high up that you need to sort of stretch out of the wheelchair to be able to reach it. Then you will figure out that it's out of order. The button is out of order. And the yellow sign on there says actually the button is out of order. So what I did was that I stepped forward and I opened the door. And I don't know if you've helped a person that is in a wheelchair. Usually they don't want to be helped. They think that that's intimidating for them. They want to be able to get along and manage by themselves. The interesting thing was when I opened the door, the wheelchair was too broad to be able to come into the toilet. And this was the wheelchair of the airport. Has a designer been there, you can think about? So usually this is the way that accessibility is treated, as an add-on that you need to sort of figure out afterwards. Why should they have a closed door? Why should they have a much more narrow opening and so forth? Simply because somebody did not think at all. It's also interesting to figure about what's happening if you see the rest of the world. We live in a world, in a part of the world where internet is a commonality, a commodity more or less, and where most people, if not all, have access to a mobile phone and so forth. In Sweden, the most recent survey done shows that 50% of all 2-year-olds are on the internet. And 91% of the entire population regularly uses internet. So we're the sort of the best country in the world when it comes to doing these kind of things. Here, things in these parts of the world, it works very differently. In India, they've sort of jumped over computers, and mobile phone is the big thing. And then there's a typically different type of interaction with mobile phones. Typically in Africa, a mobile phone isn't a personal device that you send around between people there, and many people use it, which puts specific requirements on this. So that's why I selected the quote I did for the short introduction in the program to my talk. Don Norman, how many here have heard about Don Norman before? Most of you. And then you've probably seen this is his best-selling book, The Psychology of Everyday Things. And he said the following: an ordinary user can have problems using a swing door, turn on an automatic faucet, or programming his/her VCR. In most situations, the designer aimed for beauty, not utility. He was trying to get back to the design community to say that you're probably more aiming for winning a design prize than actually contributing to changing the world. This was a long time ago. He said this back in 1988. Nowadays, he's changed, and he's written this book about emotional design, and he's a much more sort of cozy view on what design is. But the interesting thing is, if you have a meeting between interaction designers and human-computer interaction people that comes from different background, in a sense, and ask who should you involve to do different types of things in an IT development project. Both of them would raise their hand that this is typically my job. The HI person typically thinks that it's a human-computer interaction specialist, a usability expert or somebody that should manage the process of developing a computer system. And then we could bring in designers just to brush off the corners of the thing in the end and make it look neat. Similarly, designers tend to think, no, we're the one that are really designing, doing the entire process, the entire task of things. Then we can have these usability experts come in and test it in the end. So there's a tension between these groups, which is very fascinating and something that is worth thinking about. I'm going to skip a few of these slides, but in the past there's been many people discussing what it is behind design when it comes to IT, thinking about design as an exceptional, talented person, thinking about a usability professional as a renaissance person that should be able to do everything, more or less, thinking about design as merely a craft thing rather than an engineering thing, trusting in talent again in this. In Sweden, we're talking quite a lot now when we're trying to move design into more a scientific discipline about research through design. And I don't know if you've followed, for example, Daniel Fellman, a professor at Umeå University who's currently in New York, has written quite a lot about this. So has Zimmerman and Stolterman and others upon this. Research through design, where design is used as a research tool as well, which really, I believe, contributes to building the scientific discipline behind design as well, which I think is very common and very needed. And then it relates to working with difficult problems, complex problems, or wicked problems, as they talk about, problems that are actually difficult to phrase what they are and what they're working with. And in my group, we've tried to work with these simply in relation to projects that have been difficult to get funding for. And that is clearly a topic here in the discussion as well. Where do we get the funding for doing design work? Well, you don't. You get funding for doing something else, and then you stick design to it, the projects. That's typically the way that things have been done. So therefore, we needed to take projects in which design wasn't the main topic, but design was something that we included into the topics as an important thing. Meaning that to be able to get funding to do design work relating to ICT in practice, we needed to show that we actually contributed, that we helped them doing things. And there's a research methodology for that, has been around for a long time, called action research, which I have written a bit about. I think that this is really a research methodology that, now that design comes more and more into it, should be brought more back into this. Action research comes out of a tradition where you actually are intervening with the things that you're studying. You can't only have your white coat on and a notebook and then take notes and observe everything without intervening. You're into the process, you're helping them, you're working with them, and at the same time you're working with reflection upon what is happening, trying to come up with conclusions on what is happening. This is a very old tradition dating back to Kurt Lewin, who was one of those that phrased this back in the 1940s already. He coined the concept of action research, saying it's comparative research on the conditions and effects of various forms of social action and research leading to social action that uses a spiral of steps, each of which is composed of a circle of planning, action, fact-finding about the results of an action. Sounds quite general, doesn't it? But if you look into the literature about action research, and it's not so much used in human-computer interaction, nor is it much used in the design field, but it's used in information systems field. So it's more used in social science. It's used quite a lot in pedagogy as well. In the big handbook on action research, they have one of these classical definitions. Action research is an interactive inquiry process that balances problem solving, actions implemented in a collaborative context with data-driven collaborative analysis or research to understand underlying causes, enabling future predictions about personal and organizational change. I guess the authors could never, ever restate that if we woke them up in the middle of the night. A long, typically scientific definition trying to capture everything that this is about. But the thing is, it's actually quite simple. It's actually realizing that you can do research on something even though you're into and influencing things. And you can actually use the fact that you're there and influencing things as a strength in this process. And I wanted to finish up with a few examples of what that could be and how it could look like. Pictures taken from research domains where we have been involved. Think about the medical domain. Such a great source for so many inspiring, interesting projects. This is a group of doctors before performing a surgery in intensive care. That computer system was not designed for this task. It's an office computer environment. They had to take off their bloody gloves to be able to interact with it at all. And it wasn't designed for many people to stand around and have a look at it and talk about it. And why is that? Well, simply because computer scientists get the requirements of what they're doing in a very narrow down way. You're supposed to build this system, and we're gonna say requirements on what you're doing within this system. Not talking anything about everything around it. And if you, for example, not look at these people, but look at the people that meet them before they start their work, this is typically what the task would look like. This is an ambulance driver. An ambulance driver has 3 offices. He works at the hospital, he works at the ambulance station, and he works in the ambulance. And typically he also works on the street where an accident has happened and so forth. He needs to interact with all of these things at the same time, and it's really crucial that it works well. How much design have been put into this, you think? Very little, mostly construction. This is where you could have impact. This is where design could make a hell of a lot of difference to how you would be able to do your job task in a good way. Every task is like this. 98% of all jobs in Sweden today require information technology in one way or another. I mean, even elderly care. This is a home care nurse going home to a patient to look after them, to put new Band-Aid on wounds that they're having. A mobile phone that she needs to sort of upload what she's doing because there's another person that is coming there the next time. So the question is, how do you work with design in this fashion? And there are a few excellent examples of that. I wanted to start with a very old one from intensive care. And it was actually about radiology. In Uppsala, where we live, we have one of Northern Europe's biggest hospitals. And there's 15 kilometers of bookshelves with X-ray images stored over the years down there. 10% of everything gets lost every year. Nobody ever finds it again. This is supposed to be computerized. How are you going to do that? And can design help you in this process? Well, the manager of the hospital happily bought a new computer This is what's supposed to replace these 15 kilometers of bookshelves of X-rays. But nobody looked at this work task. How does it work for the radiologist, for the medical doctor that was supposed to work on this? This is an excellent design for this purpose. A big screen where they can put up their high resolution pictures and actually be able to tell quite a lot on these things. But what's happening when you turn this into a computer with the standard equipment that you're using? Actually, here we got the opportunity to work in a very design-close fashion in an EU project together with Deutsche Krebsforschungszentrum in Heidelberg. Maybe some of you have worked with them. Came up with a design called Chili, which is interesting because this was done using design methodology rather than an engineering or medically inspired methodology to come up with these design solutions to sort of capture the same thing that this work environment captured, based on trying to have a holistic picture of all of these things. And in the end, you could actually see that giving the high resolution displays that they were using at the time, the doctors could actually be able to set a diagnosis simply based on the miniatures over here. This user interface doesn't follow many of Microsoft's guidelines of how to design a user interface. It's been properly designed. If you're working if you're working into more complex domains and more recent projects, because the Chile application actually was a long time ago, this is more recent. Working with how can you design an environment for more complex settings. This is trauma diseases where you have complex accidents that require a lot of different specialists to be able to interact. There you have doctors that are running a decision meeting where they're deciding on the treatment of a patient, showing different X-rays, different similar cases from beforehand, pictures from the accident scene and so forth, discussing this. Every doctor has their iPad, working with it and putting together things and engaging in a mutual discussion in a way that was completely not possible before. Trauma is a very complex thing. There's many doctors involved, different specialists, and this really need to work properly because otherwise you lose lives quite easily. And nowadays you can even have a remote doctor expert participating on his behalf in the trauma setting, simply because they used a design approach to work with these things. And also working with it in training so that you could work on improving these things in such a situation. So when you're moving into newer things here, where's medicine going? Well, today it's more about people putting up a lot of their data on what they're doing on internet for everybody to share. And for patients actually to go through, read about, study and find out more about their disease than the doctor knows. All of a sudden we have patients that know more than the doctors do, which is a completely setting change that we need to relate to. So design needs to come a lot more into these contexts. A completely different setting. Maneuvering high-speed boats or controlling large vehicles. This is typically engineering tasks. A designer has not been very close to working with these types of fashions. Actually, what happens here is based on these engineering tasks, accidents happen. And that's typically what you study in this domain. You study what happens when a plane has crashed. What can you tell based on the black box and so forth on things? A train, for example, very old-fashioned technology, not much design happening here. How can you redesign such a thing to meet the new requirements? So a group of people at my university starting redesigning, and they started from the very beginning. The place where you decide upon which trains should be delayed. Because Sweden is not like Switzerland where everything is running minute by minute. In Sweden we have a lot of delays. 20% of all trains are delayed. delayed. So you need to make decisions. Should that train pass that now, or how should it work? And this is a room where they make decisions on this. No designers were involved here, but they actually decided that let's work with a collaborative design fashion. Collaborative design is a typically Scandinavian approach of working, where the users themselves could be educated to become designers in a collaborative fashion with engineers and designers to avoid accidents such as this happening. And then when you try to move that environment then into a normal computer screen, this was the result, or this is actually a prototype, but now it's being rolled out as a complete system. It's taken 15 years to do this development. This is not even following Microsoft's guidelines on user interface design. Here you can see trains going in one direction or the other direction. You can see where they meet, and the purple one up there is a delay, and then you can see where does that mean I need to make changes and make decisions, and then you can pull and plan by sort of dragging and dropping things into this setting. And working with very many complex short codes that these people could work with. Very neat, good interface for these typical work tasks, which is very good. And the interesting thing, I wanted to bring up a Swedish company that has a lot to do with Germany as well. This is Vattenfall, an energy planning production company from Sweden that has a lot of business in Germany as well. So this is the room. You see about a quarter of it up in the corner. It's a round room where people are sitting around there. This is where they make all decisions of all the power in Northern Europe. This is the room where they decide, should we change the wing flaps of the windmills? Should we store more water in the rivers of northern Sweden? Or should we burn more coal down in Germany? And the interesting thing was that this work task could change simply because a law changed, where instead of before where you should produce an even amount of energy, nowadays you should produce as much energy as possible when the price is high. So you need to be able to monitor the stocks development within the energy sector to make predictions and start production so that you produce to earn a lot of money. And these guys earn millions and millions of euros every day simply by this way of planning. So who do you think are the operators of this? Well, this guy is the main operator. He comes from the Swedish stock market. He has a business education. He has designed their system. And what's his knowledge? Excel. So Excel is what they use to plan and structure all development of the power over Northern Europe in this sense. It has been running for 10 years, more or less, without any interruptions whatsoever. And he designed it himself. Excel, he didn't look upon that as a computer system. He didn't look upon it as something they designed. They went out of colors because he was color coding everything. No design knowledge whatsoever on these things, but it's working properly simply because his knowledge of the domain and the problem area at hand. A few more minutes and then I'm going to leave it for questions. I was talking about the Shanghai airport. Nowadays, I am working with this extremely fascinating group of people. I'm working with IT for people with mental and physical disabilities. They're usually not visible because in Sweden you collect data by sending out surveys to people. If you have a mental disability, you won't be able to fill out a survey. So therefore, they don't show in any of the statistics on things. But these are typically homeless people, people that have various forms of quite severe mental cognitive disorders, former drug addicts maybe, but most often they have a lot of skills, a high education maybe. So we gathered people for workshops, working with a group of homeless people. Altogether, we've run workshops with more than 100 people, trying to think about what are their needs for computers and so forth, and to be able to work with that. In Sweden, you have a minimum living standard that everybody gets to have, and that in that is included a daily newspaper. A daily newspaper actually costs more than a mobile phone with internet access. But you can't get that because that's considered to be a luxury thing. But now we're sort of actually working towards also economical disability, because that's the biggest, or one of the biggest disabilities when it comes to interacting with IT in Sweden. How can you actually make use of this? For a person with paranoia, for example. I've been sitting beside somebody with paranoia trying to fill out forms at public authorities. Why do they want this information from me? Extremely fascinating to me. So when we were running workshops with them, we decided to gather them in a workshop room we had. So we sent a call for a meeting, nobody came. We tried to figure out why, and they said, we can't afford to go. Okay, we send you money. Nobody came. Because money for them was, they had better things to use the money for than come to our workshop. So then we sent train tickets to them instead. Nobody came. Simply because with these disabilities, you can't focus enough to be able to know when to start your journey to actually be able to arrive at the workshop. So we were working with an organization that sort of mentored them, followed them, reminded them, now it's time to start putting on your clothes because you're going to this workshop with Jan and others to work with these kind of things. And then they came. More than 100 of them we had in our group working with them. And the amazing stories that these people could tell about what they could need and make use of, and the problems they had in relation to that was amazing. You wanted me to also to talk a little bit about funding agencies and how do we fund research. Well, as you've seen from the example so far, we're sort of sneaking in design into projects that are of great interest to big organizations. And that means that it's actually them who are funding it by themselves. The organization pay for the work that we're doing. And we're trying to convince them of the value of actually using a design approach in that sense. But in Sweden, we also have the Swedish Energy Agency, which is a public authority that actually has research grants that they give, simply relating to how to sort of change the pattern of energy consumption. They have quite good research grants that you can get for working with things. And this comes from one of my centers called Green Leap that I have that are working on how to be able to work with, use design to understand the complex notion of energy. How can you save energy in a good way in the future when you don't know what consumes a lot of energy? How can I save this? What do I earn based on this? So designers developed, for example, this energy clock to show you over the day how much energy that you're using. And also working with the families in terms of creating more or less competitions between the youngsters in the family on how could we save as much energy as possible. Having cables that actually was showing how much energy they were consuming. And one of the most fascinating projects is a project called Life 2053. And you can follow that, unfortunately only in Swedish, on life2053.se, which is a way of taking future studies on how people perceive the life to be in the future, and then translating into a tool where you actually select your preferred way of living as you perceive it to be in the future. Do you want to use a video conference room closer to your office? Do you want to use a shared electric car that is from a carpool, or do you want to use the bicycle? And you make aware and conscious decisions on this. Which type of houses do you want to live in, and so forth. And then you get a pattern back explaining your energy consumption behavior in 2053 in relation to what it was in 2003, which was the starting point to look upon these things. And actually diminishing the energy consumption with more than 50% in this case, which is interesting. In Sweden, we have now something that we call the design faculty, which is a national research school for design. It started as a project funded by the National Science Foundation like 9-10 years ago, when we had a minister who was extremely interested in design. They actually forced the Science Council to fund such an organization that started. The expectation would be to start a research school with, say, maybe 10 PhD students or something like that. Now there's more than 50 PhD students running on this, all over Sweden, and actually spreading out to other parts of the country as well. And they actually then go and read PhD courses in a completely different fashion than they've done elsewhere. We have a foundation for Swedish industry design that is quite famous, that works with a connection to industry and how you make design become an important part of the industry, called SVID, S-V-I-D, Swedish Industry Design, that you're working with. Otherwise, the biggest funding organization is something called Vinnova, which is the public authority for innovation research. They have a lot of different programs where they fund activities relating to innovation rather than to research. But then you sneak in all sorts of research into those tasks. Here you can find a number of different things relating to design and opportunities of working with that. Particularly service design was a big program within this authority and so forth. This is similar to, in Finland, they have Tekes, who's a similar organization that work with these kind of things. But apart from that, we have not managed to convince the Science Council that design is an important subject worthy of funding, because simply they don't fit into the traditional publish and perish pattern of research and so forth. So we're still struggling to educate them on this, but these were 3 snapshots upon request here on funding ways of organizing this. My last slide. I think that design is an extremely important subject, as you may have discovered through this, but that it should have quite a broad engagement in what it's doing. I think design should take on the challenge of really tough problems, wicked problems. Design shouldn't limit itself to smaller things, but rather trying to address the bigger problem. It is starting to become scientifically mature in a way, but there still is work to be done to explain and show and make this comparable to the traditional disciplines, because they don't understand what we're doing in that sense. And they can't sort of tell that it is research or that it has any quality. And that we need to be much better at explaining to them. This is crucial for our survival, because this is what needs to be done for them to be able to actually award research funding to do these kind of things. So I think that if we can focus on the 3 things I had in the title: design, impact, and action. These are the things that could help this field grow in the future. Because the love part of things, well, that you see from the passion out of which is the driving force for the things that you're doing. But focusing on action research projects where you actually get involved in changing things, and focusing on having things that have both scientific and societal impact, that is the way that you would solve things, I would say. That's all for me. Any questions if we have the time. I know I pulled over a little bit, but I heard that the Pesha Kusha wasn't on. And I'll be around for the entire conference if you want to have a chat with me or so.